Okay, let's get this show on the road. Sorry to be a little late. So it's 5:45, not actually 5:49, but we have a workshop with David Church and Associates for our federal legislative advocate. So who's going to start off? Anybody want to start off, or is David going to come to the mic and start it off? The room right here is that no, tomorrow's a. Oh, we're supposed to roll call. Yeah. Go ahead. Actually, all members are present anyways. Yeah, all members are present, so there is roll call. So here's the room right here, David. There's a key vote tomorrow at 12 o'clock DC time. You know all about that, what that vote is about. I see we talk about it. But the room right here is that if they cannot get a speaker, the room right here is David Church may be nominated to become the Speaker of the United States House of Representatives. So with that, I introduce you a possible future Speaker, David Church.
Well, good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the council and citizens of my favorite client. Thank you so much always for having me here. A little embarrassed tonight because in the times that you've allowed me to address you in the past, I've had some things to say that are worth listening to. And I can tell you tonight, to give you some kind of analysis and prognosis about what's happening in Washington, I just don't know. So let me go through some of the things that concern me, and they ought to concern you and all the citizens of this community as well. First of all, the matter of a speaker matters because the House can conduct no business, or so we think the House can conduct no business, because this has never happened in the history of the United States. We don't know what the authority of a temporary speaker is. And my judgment would be that it's whatever the House allocates to him or her. In this case, Mr. McHenry from Carolina, I think could probably do anything he wanted to with the acquiescence and approval of the House. It has not been forthcoming. There appears to be substantial legal disagreement about that, so my opinion wouldn't matter much anyway. But we're in really uncharted waters in that in the history of our great nation, this has never happened. Just the proper order of things are now incongruous. Ordinarily, we expect the Vice President of the United States and the President of the Senate to be first in line for the succession should something happen to the President. Well, the next in line at this time tonight is Patty Murray, who is President pro tem of the Senate because there is no Speaker of the House. So not only is the line of succession interrupted, as well as the very conduct of government, because so many things, particularly expenditures, depend on activity of the U.S. House. And it's mandated by the Constitution, and we can't get around it. There's the sense that it requires 217 votes, but that's not quite true. What it requires to elect a speaker is the majority of members of the duly elected House of Representatives to be present and voting. Not everyone has to vote. So you see, I can't imagine that at any time Democrats are going to vote for a Republican as Speaker, but the way around that is they just don't have to vote. So if they vote present, for every 2 people who vote present, there's 1 fewer person that you need to approve the speaker on the other side. So every vote is kind of a half a vote if you're on the other side. So remember, it's a majority of the House, elected, sworn in, present and voting. So if you vote present, you don't count. I'm going to get into that a little bit later. Those are just peculiarities of the rules. So as we're watching our favorite TV shows or whatever, they're talking about 217. Remember, it should be 218, but there are some absences in the House right now. People die, they resign, they move on. That's a pretty common occurrence. So tonight's number is 217, but it doesn't have to be 217. Could be a different number. We just don't know what that number might be. And that's where the negotiation comes in. Jim Jordan is apparently the nominee of the Republican caucus. They're meeting as I'm addressing you right now to determine what's going to happen in that caucus tomorrow. 81 members of that caucus opposed his nomination when they met the first time. They took a recorded vote. 55 members of the caucus opposed him. He's not, I think, historically known as a peacemaker or a bipartisan deal maker or a conciliator. Hasn't been particularly noted for his acquiescence to what we would see as normal appropriations, accommodations coming down. And a little bit, I'd like you to keep in mind about appropriations because it's less so today, but when I got my start on Capitol Hill, there were three kinds of members. There were Democrats, there were Republicans, and there were appropriators. And that was the single committee where we worked deals across the aisle back and forth. That really came to a conclusion in 1986 with the inception of Ice-T, because as so many things happen in Washington, those of us who were in the appropriations arena tended to give short shrift to those who were authorizers. And see, the idea of the Congress is that the authorizing committees that are the most of the committees create the programs. And that's how things happen in America. And all the appropriators do is take out the pen and write the check. Well, we had the nation's checkbook. We didn't mostly care what those guys did who were the authorizers. We just funded whatever program we thought was a good idea and defunded whatever program we thought was not a good idea. That came to a head with transportation with Ice-T. And it's continued to really be a kind of not putting appropriations in the background, but not giving them the kind of authoritarian authority that we tended to have when I worked with appropriations. I think that's important because one of the things that I see, and I know very little about the inner workings, all I can tell you is people were not in town over the weekend. A lot of telephone calls were made. I wasn't party to many or most of those calls. Promises were made about which I don't know. So I don't know what happens in the caucus tonight. I don't know what happens in the recorded vote tomorrow. But I have a few guesses. One of the things that I think some real opposition came from appropriators to Jim Jordan. But you will notice today that Mike Rogers, who is chairman of the Armed Services Committee, and our own Ken Calvert, who's chairman of the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee, both are now backing Jim Jordan. I see that as just a huge step forward for Jordan because I saw one of the real difficulties he would have is bringing on people who were interested in the whole appropriations process. It's one of the things that's kind of defining the difference between people who are in the House today who want to change America's direction in terms of restricting money and those who are more inclined to continue programs that we already have, maybe in a changed format or with less or more money, but the argument is there. So appropriations matter a lot. I'm good friends with a appropriator from Miami, Mario Diaz-Balart. We happen to know him because he was chair of the Transportation Appropriations Committee in the last Congress. I think he got termed out. We happen to know him because he was a great friend for the Gerald Ford International Airport in Grand Rapids, which happens to be, they're like my second favorite client. Not nearly as close to where you are, but you know, we pay attention to them. In any event, it was important for this airport, was important for you in transportation. Had the occasion to talk to him today because I saw that he was now supporting Jordan. In a brief conversation, wasn't so clear. So I don't know. All I can tell you is what appeared to me to be a done deal on the news may not be. such a done deal. We'll just see what happens tomorrow. What I can also tell you is that there are a group of people who are absolutely not going to vote for anyone other than Kevin McCarthy. Now, only requires 4. Can they be persuaded in terms of unity or in terms of making the government work or whatever else to back Jordan or whomever else? Maybe, maybe not. And I mention that because one of the things, and I think Councilmember Rue, who has experience on Capitol Hill, would agree with this wholeheartedly. Bill, I'm calling on you now. You'll have to shake your head yes. This is a game of where everyone thinks it makes sense, so you're going to support this because it's the right thing. The Congress is a collection of personalities, and they get along and they don't get along, and sometimes they don't get along for really strange reasons. You wear the wrong tie. I never liked the tie you had on, and I'm never voting for you because you can't even dress right. Now, that's a little bit over the top, but not too far. Like other personal relationships, personalities count. So if you were really committed to Kevin McCarthy, will you change your vote now and back Jim Jordan tomorrow? And I think very much depends on what's happening right now as I'm talking to you in that Republican caucus. What kind of promises are made? What kind of a speaker can we have under what rule amendments, if there are rule amendments, or do we continue going on to have one member who might just be able to pull the trigger? Don't know. What happens if Jordan can't reach the number to be speaker? Without saying too much, I can tell you that for some days now, at a very high level, let me put it that way, at a very high level, there are bipartisan negotiations about how to deal with the U.S. House of Representatives in a bipartisan manner. Whoa, can't happen in America today because everybody hates everybody and we're not getting together on anything, and that's absolutely wrong because every major piece of legislation in the last Congress and so far in this Congress has been bipartisan. The Senate has reported out of committee all 12 appropriations bills in a bipartisan manner. 7 were passed unanimously. So it's not unheard of. If you wanted the House to go forward, I can tell you one of the things that will happen is the Speaker will be a Republican. I think that's just a given based on numbers. That's not kind of open to negotiation. But it's not unheard of to be sharing committee assignments, to have more equal numbers in, for instance, the Rules Committee. We can do those things, and there is some negotiation going on. I don't know about tonight, because tonight's really determined by what happens in the Republican conference. That could resolve this issue. It matters because we just have to move some legislation. We have to fund the government. Well, we have a whole month to do it. Folks, we have 12 days. We have 12 working days in the U.S. House to continue to fund and some serious disagreements about what that level ought to be. We thought we had an agreement when we passed the debt ceiling, but that caused Kevin McCarthy's downfall. So who knows what that agreement is today or whether or not it will be sustained? What will be the rules that a new speaker will operate under? All these things are unknown. And as Californians, it matters to us a lot. We here in this state have taken some real hits. We've had power that's been really the envy of the rest of America, and we've feasted on that power for some time. We've had the Speaker of the U.S. House in Nancy Pelosi, not there. We've had the Speaker of the U.S. House in Kevin McCarthy, not there. We've had one of the most respected and senior members of the Senate in Dianne Feinstein, not there. So we now have more junior members of the Senate, and not the kind of power we had to be able to put forth our interests here in California. And I can tell you, we have interests that are different from the rest of America, and we need those people in real powerful positions to be able to advance those interests. And as I said before, well, these people, Butler and Padilla, will be very effective, and I'm sure they will be, and I hope and pray that they are, and they will advance our best interests. But these are institutions, you've heard me say it before, that worship at the altar of seniority. In Washington, you acquire power just by continuing to breathe. That's a good thing. You stay alive for a while, and pretty soon you're chair of a committee, and it matters. So we're a little ways away from where we were before. We are fortunate in this particular area, unlike the rest, in that we have on both sides of the aisle, not only our own Congress people right here and the adjoining member and the member adjoining just to the east of us on both sides of the aisle. And these are very powerful people, so at least we're somewhat insulated from the rest of it. But as we get through now the whole business of government funding, if we look to Jordan as being Speaker, he's never been a fan of earmarks, for instance. What would happen if we did away with earmarks? And remember, we don't have any of these appropriations bills passed yet. There's been CRs, continuing resolutions. They may be all rolled into one omnibus at the end, but anything can happen with those pieces of legislation. So in the end, we had a caucus vote early in the year. Our good friend Tom McClintock, we have some interest in his district in Northern California. It's really not Northern California. No, we Los Angeles seem to think of Northern California as San Francisco. It's only halfway up the state. There's a whole state beyond San Francisco. You should go up there sometime. It has beautiful trees. People smoke funny stuff, but they do have beautiful trees. In any event, and end of that story is McClintock tried to do away with earmarks, and I can't remember the exact vote, but it was something like 152 to 36, and he lost the vote. So there's support for earmarks within the Republican caucus, but it depends on, where the powers, how much squeak can the squeaky wheel make, and we're not home free on the earmark things yet. We're not home free on the government funding. We're not free on just about anything that we're doing. So I'm sorry that I don't have more definitive news to give you tonight. All I can tell you is that I don't know. I don't have a clue. And if I was a betting person, this is one I just set out because I couldn't afford to lose the money. Now, Mr. Jones is going to wax eloquently about what's really happening, and he at least knows what he's talking about. Thank you for listening to me.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thank you very much. I know David sort of regaled you and gave you a macro view of what is happening in Washington, D.C., and particularly with the House of Representatives. I'm going to burrow down and actually talk about things that really matter to the city, your priorities that we've been advocating in Washington, D.C. with your help and with your the city staff have been remarkable. I want to compliment them. We've been working in the beginning of the year with your congressional delegation on the FY24 appropriation process. These are called community project funding requests, and we've been, well, the city has been very successful working with your delegation, in particular with Congresswoman Norma Torres, who's been a true champion of the city. We have the Congresswoman has secured $1 million for the Montclair Trans Center Facilities Enhancement Project. The funding will be used to provide upgrades to existing bus facilities, including new benches, trash bins, directional signage, and a bicycle storage facility, and security and information center kiosk. She actually requested $5.6 million in the appropriations request to the House Transportation Appropriations Committee, and secured $1 million. The reason why that number is not higher is that the Republicans in the House made a decision earlier this year to allocate 62% of the earmark funding for Republican projects. And so obviously, Democrats are getting around 38% of the funding. This is not the way that it played out in the last Congress. A number of Democratic members of the House are upset about this allocation. And one of the things that even further distorts the process is that every single House member asked for an earmark, or what they call community project funding, except one member, Katie Porter, who is running for the Senate. Only about 2/3, about 67% of House Republicans asked for earmarks. So they got a larger share of the pie with fewer requests going in. So they've done very well. But regardless, these are things that both the leadership from the Democrats and Republicans will iron out. In this Congress, they have another session, obviously, to go through, and we'll see if the allocation sticks. And then, obviously, there'll be an election, and it'll determine who controls the House in the next Congress. But regardless, I wanted to bring that up only because your Congresswoman went to bat for the city, and I wanted to make sure that you're aware of it. The city staff has worked very closely with her office, both here at the district level and as well as in Washington, D.C. We had members of the council come out and advocate directly for these projects. And obviously, that matters. Having being invested in this process matters a lot. Elected members like to talk to other elected members. I know that might come as a surprise sometimes, but they want to see the elected folks from Montclair, and I think it's effective being in Washington, D.C., so I do want to make that pitch. But back to the appropriation cycle. So we have the House, we have this earmark, and we'll have to see how it plays out. David mentioned the appropriations process, the threat of a government shutdown. The issue for us at our level is what happens in December. Is the House able to pass and enact a long-term either congressional funding bill or an omnibus that funds the government through September 30th? Or do they kick the can down the road and do a continuing resolution, either funding it for a couple of months or through the fiscal year? If they do a continuing resolution, the threat is that that earmarks are not included in what they call a clean bill. And that would be obviously it would not just affect Montclair, it would affect every single earmark in the country. And there are thousands of these. So clearly there's an incentive in Congress, particularly in the House, to get these things done and to get a deal. So a lot of this will determine how the next Speaker of the House plays his or her cards, in this case his cards, whether or not it's Jordan or someone else. But all this will play out in the next couple of weeks, couple of months. And we're watching this very closely. I know that the Congresswoman, who is an appropriator, is on top of this. So we'll just have to see how this plays out. Another issue that we have been advocating on behalf of is the San Antonio Creek Multipurpose Maintenance Road and Recreation Trail Project. It's very costly, it's very expensive, but a great project. A project that we have submitted on behalf of the city for consideration for the Water Resources Development Act. That is an authorization bill. It's not a funding bill, but it's an authorization bill that funds core projects. And we have submitted that. We submitted to Senator Feinstein, and we submitted it earlier this year, and we've submitted to Senator Padilla. We've had a number of conversations with Padilla's staff, And it appears that, they're interested in this project, so essentially the Senate is currently accepting projects and vetting projects for the reauthorization of the Water Resources Development Act. So we will know probably early next year how this plays out on the Senate side. On the House side, the House has not yet called for projects from the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. That's the committee that will put a call out, say, to members of the House, submit projects for consideration. So we will be working very closely with Representative Torres's office in this process. We'll have a second bite at the apple, and I'll be working with your staff on the details. My understanding at the moment is this is like close to $100 million project. I think that's sort of a loose number, but this is a significant project. If we can get the project authorized in WARDA, it opens up the appropriations process for your congressional delegation to secure funding. And those can be done in fairly large numbers if you have an authorized project. So that's the end objective of this process. We are also working with the Congresswoman's office in showcasing and highlighting some of your priorities, project priorities. And we will be touring some of these projects tomorrow with the Congresswoman's district office, all in line in trying to set up for the next cycle of the appropriations process, which is for fiscal year 2025, even though the current fiscal year hasn't been finished yet. We want to sort of queue all the projects up and vet them with your congressional delegation and make sure that if there are issues of concern, we address them before the Congresswoman has to make a decision about what to support. So I'm optimistic about that. Again, it's depending on what happens. If Mr. Jordan is the next Speaker of the House, as David mentioned, he has not been inclined to support earmarks, but at the same time, 2/3 of his conference supports earmarks. So my guess is you have to pick your fights, and this may not be one area where he does. But I guess the bottom line is we're working closely with your staff. We're working closely with the congressional delegation. You have a new senator. She's trying to get her office up and going. That's a full-time job. But you have Senator Padilla, who's been very attentive. He has supported the Trans Center project. He submitted it for funding. It did not make it through on the final list on the Senate side, but nevertheless, the fact that he recognized this was an important project for the community and had expressed an interest in it, I think is a good sign. So I think we're hopeful on for the next cycle as well. So I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Well, thank you very much. I'm assuming that the funding we received for the police department's cameras is not affected. That's still...
This is not affected. That's
Yeah,
correct.
yeah.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
That's from the last fiscal year, and that's finished.
Right. Any questions from my colleagues on my right? Bill and Ben? No? No? How about on my left? Anybody, any questions on my left here? Well, that's good. I got a question from Dave Turch.
Good. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you. Yeah, Dave Turch. So, when the House a couple weeks ago removed Kevin McCarthy, do you think the Democrats made a wise move to essentially vote with the 8 or 11 Republicans? Do you have an opinion on that?
I have no opinion.
Okay, that's fine.
The answer to that is you're asking for a personal analysis, and I think having been there for a long time and having California's interest in mind, as I say, I can recall when I first started coming to California, Junipero Serra and I would have discussions about what was good for the state. So in any event, my impression is Kevin has done a surprisingly good job. I had not really expected his ability to produce what he's produced in the better part of a year at which he was Speaker. So I think that was surprising to me. Um, Kevin's a different kind of an animal than Jim Jordan or Nancy Pelosi. Pelosi certainly understands power. Jordan understands an ideological position and is more, I'm looking for the right charitable word here, let's say pushy. Boy, that's about as charitable as I can get right now. Whereas Kevin is well-liked and prefers to be well-liked. And I think in each case, those personality traits have served them well. I think what happened to Kevin is he is not so ideologically focused. There's not an ideological North Star. And what happened then is that when we had the bipartisan, for instance, in an attempt to preserve the speakership, he created, at least that's our judgment in Washington, without a floor vote or anything else, an impeachment committee. Well, it pretty much angered Democrats on the other side who had no advance notice and found no evidence of any kind this ought to exist. So maybe we ought to create a committee to look for some evidence as opposed to assuming we had some. That was one. And then two, went on national television networks to talk about how Democrats had attempted to put the nation into a government shutdown position when that wasn't the case at all. So I think in two cases, what I hear from my Democratic friends is that they really felt betrayed when they had cooperated with Kevin to do something everyone thought was in the national interest. He really backed out of what they saw as kind of a gentleman's agreement. And in the end, then, when you're asking my opinion about were the 8 justified or not, I mean, in each case, they have to make their own judgment. In some cases, it appears to be personality. In others, not so much so. But that's kind of the background. That's kind of how I think we got to where we are. And as I asked for Council Members Rue acquiescence and kindly shake your head yes again. See, personalities matter so much. Thank you. Mr. Councilman.
Good. Any other questions? Well, I appreciate you both being here. Hopefully, the pork barrel money will still take place with a new speaker. And we'll see where that goes, but we're excited if we can get the funding for the Transit Center. I appreciate all the hard work you guys are trying to do to make that true. And with that, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Before I adjourn the meeting, I'm supposed to do a public comment. I don't do a very good job. I'm looking at my agenda. So we have members of the public that want to speak to the council.
We do not.
We do not. Nobody on Zoom, nobody in the audience. Christine?
No, there's
Sure,
no one.
okay, good answer, Christine. So now we're adjourned. Thank you.